The main point, if you look at how the member states dealt with this scope, is that most of the member states took separate provisions of the ePrivacy Directive and transposed it in various national frameworks. To give you an example, many member states transposed Article 13 concerning unsolicited communications, not in their national electronic communications legal framework, but in the consumer protection legal framework. And so the scope of the national legislation is in many member states, if not most of the member states, different from the scope as defined by the directive. And that's something that we have to keep in mind. Of course, the study deals with the fundamental discussion: is it still necessary to keep the distinction between electronic communications and information society services and audiovisual services? Because in fact, if you look at the online context in Europe today, from a legal point of view, you have three sectors, separate sectors with separate regulatory frameworks. You have the electronic communications, you have information society services with the very specific definition and the Commerce Directive of 2000. And then you have the Audiovisual Services Directive, also with a very specific definition. And we all know that these distinctions are very artificial, that there is this phenomenon of convergence, and that in the long run, this distinction probably doesn't make sense anymore. The only question that we have asked ourselves is, should we abandon at this stage the fundamental distinction in the structure of the European legal framework in this area, or isn't it better to postpone that discussion? And our recommendation to the European Commission is, let's keep it simple. The only thing that we propose today is align the text of the directive a little bit to what is already the practice. In practice, we see that many provisions of the ePrivacy Directive today are already applicable to information society services. And again, the most obvious example is Article 5.3 about cookies. The provision on cookies is not applied only by electronic communication service providers. It is mainly applicable to information society service providers. We all know that. So we recommend the Commission simply to extend the scope. It has very important consequences, but it is quite simple. Extend the scope of the ePrivacy Directive and make it applicable to the protection of privacy and the processing of personal data in connection with all kinds of services, the provision of publicly available, but all kinds of services, also information society services, in public and publicly accessible private communications networks. Publicly available private communications networks comes from a recommendation of the EDPS. It was made in the context of the 2009 revision of the ePrivacy Directive already.